All right, so it's happy birthday, John Hinkley Jr. Turned 70 today, May 29th. Also, happy birthday, JFK, who some believe is still alive, possibly wearing a Trump suit. And the JFK crowd is alive and well. They're not as populous as the chemtrail cult, but the JFK worshippers are there, and I see their representatives all over the place. And the interesting thing about John Hinckley's birthday, of course, is he's the one who shot Reagan, and then Brady, who died 33 years later on August 4th of the head wound. I mean, insanity to believe this stuff as reported. And he was inspired by and even dressed as Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, played by Robert De Niro. So Robert De Niro kind of inspired this guy to do the real-life shooting of Reagan. Interestingly, Robert De Niro played in Machete, Senator McLaughlin, who is giving a very Trump-esque anti-immigrant speech when he is shot at. This is, of course, 14 years before the shooting, but just there's this overlapping that we've often pointed out here between the movies and the fake news events, and it goes even deeper when you look at the birth dates. In fact, we were just talking about Mickey 17 and how Mark Ruffalo's character represents Trump, and he gets shot, his cheek is bloodied, he poses for the cameras. His birthday is 11/22, JFK's death day. And this is a consistent pattern, which is why we frequently have Drastic Liars on here, because he's noticed this probably more than anybody. What's up, Jamari and May? June 11th is less than 2 weeks away. Exactly. We're interesting. This is going to be possibly a critical turning point, maybe a plot twist, if this follows the same pattern as usual, because, we were more or less prescient with regard to the 3/11 thing. But this one has the promise, I think, to be even more definitive, because we've been talking about it longer. Last year at this time, and really leading up to Butler 7/13, we were talking about the upcoming staged assassination attempt. Now, what we're looking forward to with this June 11th is this repeated theme of some kind of domestic violent extremist attack on America's power grid. EMTs are implicated. And I was talking about Final Destination, not just that movie and all the significance that it contains, but also the trailer of Fantastic Four, which was right before that movie, which featured a spectacular explosion in the sky above a city and a global blackout. And as we consistently observe, the high-profile popular entertainment that paints the popular imagination just it's like force memeing. They flood the zone with certain ideas and concepts. That's a pretty good predictor of what's going to happen in the fake news. Same thing with game releases. Do you remember it was Modern Warfare 3 was released on the eve of 10/7? These aren't coincidental. It wasn't coincidental that Netflix released Waco American Apocalypse the night before Trump kicked off his campaign in Waco. With all the connections between Waco and white nationalism and terrorism, you would think that he wouldn't want to kick off his campaign there unless he were deliberately signaling something. And, of course, he plays ignorant about this, but if you look at the bigger script, yeah, there is a story here. All right, moving on. Joined here by Michelle K, Ted Stryker 2112. There's about 30 others. And pretty soon we'll be back live on audio. Things have been a little constrained, but they're going to pick up rapidly. In fact, we'll be getting the first set of PSYOP trading cards in about a week. And then from there, things will pick up. And I'm trying to work out something in my schedule so we can maintain an open Discord server with a purpose, which we'll get into at the appropriate time. Let's go ahead and start with this. This was sent to me by one of our regular chatters here. This is Sarah Silverman. Busy56 sent this to me. Sarah Silverman on Conan O'Brien. And she's talking about the Challenger explosion as well as the fake moon landing. In fact, just to make sure we don't have any sort of buffering. 1 second here. Okay. Again, this is Sarah Silverman on Conan O'Brien, and this was just 10 days ago. So apparently it's, I guess, safe to joke about the Challenger explosion being a big fat hoax. Is she going to get sued by the survivors for $1.5 billion?
I don't know. I mean, the moon landing was fake. Are you? I don't know.
I am not. No, I am one of those people that thinks the simplest explanation is usually the correct one.
Occam's razor.
There you go. I shave with it every day.
Didn't even go to college.
You don't need to go to college. Yeah, I'm not. I am not. I'm when people say, "Hey, man, you know what I think happened, man," I'm not in on that ride usually.
Yeah, my the guy who does my makeup is really fell into a whole thing about how the Challenger didn't really explode and all those people are still alive. And,
right.
You know, I was in 9th grade and we watched it because there was a teacher from Concord, the next town over, Christy McCullough.
Yeah, who was killed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or was she?
Where are they? Where does he say they are?
They're just living regular lives.
Oh.
And with different names.
Does he ever explore?
I don't know. I mean, the moon landing was fake.
So there you have it. Sarah Silverman calling the Challenger explosion fake. Now, is that comic fodder? Can you joke about it now? Is it safe? We talked about this like last week. I was mentioning how when I brought it up, Fight the Flat Earth broke into tears, pretty much. Well, he cried. I did make him cry. Mega earthquake fears hit Japan, sparked by manga comic, which accurately predicted the 2011 tsunami disaster. So the Fukushima 2011 disaster was the original 311. That was 311, 2011, Ground Zero, Fukushima. But that was predicted by a comic, which I didn't know. Very reminiscent of Utopia, about a comic that predicts pandemics down to the very numbers of the casualties for these outbreaks. And this group of comic nerds gets their hands on an unreleased version, which gives them insight as to what's about to happen. So they're hunted down since they know too much. I mean, imagine if you had the Metascript playbook for all the major psyops for the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, that would make you, it'd put you in a position to get Biff Tannen money. Now, in this case, a comic predicted the tsunami disaster in 2011, and apparently this is resurfacing, and it's affecting travel. So Japanese comic book predicts major disaster in July. Why are tourists canceling vacation plans? So I'm going to play this clip here. Again, this is a bit of news coverage regarding this Japanese comic, this manga, which is predicting some kind of disaster, and apparently it's affecting people's travel plans to Japan.
Can a comic book predict a real catastrophe?
Can a comic book predict a real catastrophe? Let's just start with that. Yes. So can video games.
We all know about
and
Simpsons,
movies.
The cartoon that predicts.
Okay, now I'm not going to play all of this. We just have some limitations when it comes to the internet connection here. But what I will do is put on the closed caption and take out the key points. Japanese comic predicts major disaster in July. Why are tourists canceling vacation plans? Okay, now this again is an example of predictive programming. And of course, her go-to comparison here is to compare it to The Simpsons, which is, you know, one of these mainstream places or mainstream examples. And I don't take any kind of Simpsons cartoons as relevant to our conversation because there are too many fake examples of it. And it's one of the things about truthers in the age of deep fakery is that they've availed themselves of all the tools of fakery, and you're just as likely to find fake news, manipulated news with the quote truthers as with the liars, the mainstream. Okay, let me play this clip again. Can a comic book predict a real catastrophe? We all know about The Simpsons, the cartoon that predicted Trump's presidency, but a new threat has emerged for the tourism industry in Japan. A psychic predicts mass destruction in Japan. Decades ago, an artist issued a warning through her comic book from 1999 called The Future I Saw. This foretells a significant catastrophe in the month of July 2025 among East Asian visitors. So that's the breakdown of this. I'd like to get my hands on this comic book. 5G says this chick predicted the tsunami, supposedly. I never heard about that. Penguinati Auto Hoaxer says Sarah Silverman will next bring up Timothy McVeigh's new life. Yeah, it could be. There's a lot of overlap between comedians and conspiracy theories, and I think it's because they traffic in edgy content. And when you say something that is outside somebody's worldview, like, hey, the earth is flat, their response is to laugh. It's an easy laugh. So when you say, oh yeah, the Challenger explosion was fake, it was a big psyop, they got all your money, traumatized you, people want to laugh because it's funny. Okay, travelers avoid trips to Japan over viral comic books quake prediction. Social media and viral posts have unsettled travelers with renewed attention to the artist Ryo Tatsuki's prediction of a huge earthquake that would inundate Japan with tsunami waves. This is July 2025. This was republished in 2021 with additional content, and quake speculation received new life on social media recently. Now, as far as bookings, so bookings for trips. Says, though scientists say the exact timing can't be predicted, airline bookings from Taiwan, South Korea, and Hong Kong have dropped since April, plunging 50% versus a year ago. So that's a significant drop-off. Tomonoid3 says, like Watchmen predicting New York City event or V for Vendetta virus. And that goes back to, of course, another metascriptor worth mentioning, Alan Moore. Alan Moore, V for Vendetta. In fact, he wrote something in Watchmen, one of the episodes about space junk. One of the episodes, one of the comic issues featured space junk. And I remember looking into that one because it was released on 11/3, which had some connotations. But also, I watched the series and it looked like, I think they had some kind of Kraken land on New York. But V for Vendetta, of course, has plenty of relevance for 2020. What's up, 5G? Copaesthetic. Ted Stryker, we have ceiling collapses. Yes. Now, the ceiling collapses, there's two now. We have one was for the Captain America. And so the Captain America trailer was altered by Marvel because it featured the president being shot at a podium and then falling to the ground. And that was released on July 12th. So the day before Trump was shot. So they went ahead and they altered it because of, it was a sensitive thing. Somebody died. That whole idea was it's real, so we must alter what we release. But when the movie was screening in Washington at Liberty Theater, the ceiling fell. So we're like, okay, Washington, Liberty, ceiling falling. And the shooting in the movie was in a theater. So there's some connection here. And then, of course, Final Destination, that story went viral. Even people I know who are completely blue pill, who are just oblivious, uninformed, more than misinformed, even they heard about the ceiling collapse. So I take that to be, it's a PR stunt. And we have some stuff about that as well. I'll continue to go through my notes. Trump posts a meme saying he's on a mission from God, featuring alt-right symbol Pepe the Frog. The posting co-opts a famous line from the Blues Brothers, and it contributes to a surge in the price for crypto assets related with Pepe the Frog. Was anybody here invested in that particular Ponzi, that particular rug pull? No, I'm sure it was legit. But he posted a meme that has Pepe the Frog and nothing can stop what is coming. So he's pandering to the QAnon crew again. And a lot of the Q people and the JFK impersonators, and even the Elvis impersonator, Bob Joyce, are saying the end is near. But we can't forget recent history, because 8,647 days after 9/11, James Comey, put the 8647, the Trump threat, on the beach. So we have to keep in mind that that's just weird. The timing is weird. The messaging is clear. And not only do we have the concurrent release of Final Destination with the Space Needle elevator opening, which is, of course, what happens in the movie, but I think we have something else coming up as well. Let me go ahead and bring this up. So Trump's talking about being on a mission from God. And we'll get back to the dates, but there's this protest movement going on. So on 6/14, that's Flag Day, and it's the 250th anniversary of our military, the American military. There's a protest movement called No Kings. And on 6/14, on Trump's birthday, No Kings is having a nationwide day of defiance during his birthday parade. Now, I noted this, and I thought, okay, that might be significant, this No Kings thing. But then today, I stopped at a thrift store, and I picked up a copy of Fraser's Golden Bow, which I've read it a little while ago. This is something that was referenced quite heavily in James Shelby Downard's King Kill 33. So if you're not familiar with this, the JFK assassination is explained from a metascript perspective by James Shelby Downard in this article, King Kill 33, as a ritual killing of the king. And in this particular case, JFK is associated with Osiris. And there's elements to the story that overlap with the killing of Osiris. But this killing of a king ritual thing, a lot of the concept here draws from the research of this anthropologist. Let me see if I can get this to open. I'll get to it in a minute. But anyway, I picked up his book, Golden Bow, and I was just reading about Osiris, a god of grain, like corn. It says here, in his myth, there's the death, the dismemberment, the resurrection. And this mirrors the agricultural cycle of planting, decay, and growth. So Osiris, this sun god of death resurrecting, this theme is something that we often see played out in these various myths. Osiris Rex, remember that rocket they sent out there to hit the rock called the Bennu, which is a prototypical phoenix. I mean, it's a very common symbol and name that we often note here. But I was just noting in this book, I was reading from that particular section because I was trying to remember the source material that Downward put into King Kill 33. In fact, here I found it. So King Trump Osiris's crown of corn tortilla. So I'm sitting in the parking lot reading this book, and here's the, I actually posted this in Discord at the time, Killing of the Divine King. Kings killed when their strengths fail. So I focused on the chapter about the sacrificial king, and I went there because of this JFK assassination connection. So a core aspect of King Kill 33 is the parallel with the ancient Egyptian myth of Osiris. And in the myth, Osiris is a king and god, and he's murdered and resurrected. And then his symbol is the obelisk, which we have repackaged today as the rocket. But same basic symbol. So I just noted this king thing, and then I realized, okay, the No Kings group is coming out, and I go over to Discord, the Drudge Report. I check all the fringe sites and the mainstream sites, the news aggregators, what are people getting into their heads that day? And so I always check the Drudge. And there's this image of Donald Trump with a crown of tacos, corn tortilla. And I'm thinking about it, wait, this, at first I ignored it because I saw they were saying Trump always chickens out, and they've been antagonizing him with the word taco. So I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? Is this just some random meme, or is this a linking of Trump with King Osiris, the sacrificial king figure? So in the Golden Bow, Fraser describes how the kings or priests were sometimes killed to renew the land's fertility, a practice he saw reflected in the Osiris myth and rituals. Over time, the killing of kings or human victims was replaced by symbolic acts, such as the burial and sprouting of Osiris corn mummies, preserving the ritual's meaning without actual human sacrifice. This kind of reminds me of a couple of things, but just to stick to this, in Egyptian tradition, Osiris as corn god, god of grain. So here we have possibly nothing, possibly random, but if King Kill 33 is an accurate description of the subtext of the ritual underscoring the killing of Kennedy, then surely the same plot, the same storyline, this template is in play here, that Trump would be embodying the same. And we've been talking about the connections between Lincoln and Kennedy and their respective assassinations. And so I'm looking to see how this might connect to Trump. And the Trump JFK assassinations have already been established. The whole Q cult has made that clear. The Lincoln stuff has also been connected. And so looking at this crown of this ridiculous picture, this crown of corn tortillas, I thought, okay, well, now that he's being called a king specifically for his birthday in a couple of weeks, it may not be such a stretch, especially when you consider the role of all popular media outlets as really just worldview framing memes and narrative guardrails. Speaking of guardrails and guardrailers, here's the image. I made this today. I was just thinking, because I remember Tim Pool, Occupy Wall Street. I had vague recollection, but he referenced that's where he got his start. And I thought, has this guy really been wearing a beanie since Occupy Wall Street? I mean, that's dedication, but I don't know. There's something almost pathological about it. And I'm thinking, what kind of alternatives could you have? After 14 years of wearing a beanie. So I asked Grok, and it gave me this. Looks like some kind of, it's tattoo work. I like it. It's decorative, kind of tribal tattoos over his cranium. Anyway, Tim Pool was called out pretty savagely by Groyper Commander-in-Chief Nick Fuentes. So there's a lot of I would say there's a rift growing on the right between the mainstream right, the MAGA right, the pro-Israel right, and then the far right, who are now being outgrouped as woke. And I've been talking about this off and on for the last few days. I've been observing it closely. There's no turning it back. But it is the case now, as I've been saying for some time, that the red pill movement represents an alt-woke. Well, this concept is actually mainstreaming in right-wing politics. They're not designating the red pillars, but they're calling the Groypers, the nationalists, the conspiracy theorist leaning types. They're categorizing all of them as woke right. And there's a lot of gnashing of teeth. A lot of people are just crying, and there's a lot of they're really struggling with this label because it fits. It really does fit. And I've talked about the comparisons for some time, this political horseshoe model and how it's been applied to the world stage. And I'm only highlighting this because it's an example of how the compartmentalization works, and we can see it in real time. All right, the Trinity nuke was detonated. Anna Nicole Wordsmith put this together. A good channel to follow. The Trinity nuke was designated at 5:29 a.m. on 7/16/1945. Okay, 7/16 is the date that Apollo 11 launched from JFK spaceport. So you've got, let me pull this up actually. I want to fact check this. Let me ask Grok. 7/16/1969 Apollo. It's also the date JFK died, 7/16. Okay, no, 7/16, but where did it launch from? Neil Armstrong got paid $33 for the mission, by the way. Cape Kennedy, it's called. So the Cape Kennedy, so the name Kennedy's tied into this. So Trinity nuke detonated at 5:29, 7/16, 1945. 5:29 is JFK's birthday. The JFK Jr. plane that he was in was N529. He died 7/16. That one he died in had 529 backward on it. There's a couple of other things here, but the date we were just pointing out here, the 529 connects JFK, his birthday, but also it has this connection to the Trinity nuke detonation. And what's significant about this here is the Trinity thing, the Trinity story, that the nuke itself is brought into King Kill 33. So in Downard's breakdown of the JFK assassination and the symbolism behind it, he incorporates a number of elements, and one of the things he talks about is the significance of the Trinity site and that detonation. And he said that there were three major transformative, he didn't say psychological operations, he described them as rituals, but three major rituals that would be alchemically processing mankind into this new consciousness, basically MK Ultra for the masses. And the first was the Trinity site. The second was the JFK assassination. And the third was the moon landing. So his concept was that there was a sequence of events, major events, that would get us all into the simulation, into this dream world. And he talked about this ritual of Kennedy's assassination specifically being done to drag mankind into a dream world, essentially a play, but our world is now infused with these really, propaganda is the same thing, infusing our world with lies, augmentations, but in this case, taking us into a realm of surreality on purpose. And that's one of the reasons why, in his view, Downard's view, King Kill 33, why you have these almost intentional revelations of ritual and just occult stuff out there. So on some level, you're processing that you're being messed with, which further solidifies their control. That's the theory explained by he and Michael Hoffman in Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Now, I don't think JFK was really killed in the sense. I think it was just a movie. Same with all these other events, even the nuke, the atom bomb. But the connections here with the dates and the numbers are highly significant. So you have the Kubrick connection too. Kubrick releases Dr. Strangelove 11/22. Of course, that one's about the bomb. So 11/22, 1963, the date Kennedy dies, Dr. Strangelove comes out. So already there you have a connection with the bomb and Kennedy. And then you have the Kennedy's death on 7/16, the same day that Eyes Wide Shut, another Kubrick, comes out. And those are just a couple of examples. But this is Anna Nicole Wordsmith. And I mentioned in her comments that Hinkley is also born this date. And there are other examples. I was in a Jurassic Liar's comments today mentioning this, how 5/29 is the death date for Dennis Hopper, who plays a Trump-esque King Koopa in the Super Mario Brothers, where they, I guess the word would be, they vaporize or they destroy the Twin Towers. But they're called the Koopa Towers. But there's no dispute that King Koopa is based on Donald Trump in that particular one. So yeah, Trump posts a frog meme, Pepe the Frog, riled up his base, and they're calling him Taco, which I think is absurd, but might have another purpose. We talked about Sarah Silverman joking about the Challenger explosion. So again, I guess it's fair game. What's next? Is she going to joke about the Sandy Hook kids? So the Space Needle has, as far as the Seattle Space Needle, they have their own Instagram account. And they actually put a picture of the real Space Needle next to the one from the movie. Now, from what I read, because of trademark copyrights, they couldn't steal the exact design for the movie. But regardless, Space Needle posted an image of it. Can I copy your homework? Yeah, just change it a little. So here you have the Space Needle itself acknowledging the movie. And again, the movie opens up 1968, which is when the Twin Towers construction begins. 9/11 connection. But it happens to be when the sky, it's called the Sky View, is opening. And just about 3 or 4 days ago, the Skyliner opened. And there's a lot of news articles right now about the Skyliner at the Space Needle. But the Skyliner was paid for with the $100 million. And I've been talking about the Century project since it came out, and the $100 million going into the Space Needle. And I said, look, this $100 million is paying for the next PSYOP that's going to take this thing out. So it's kind of notable here that the first milestone from that $100 million was just opened up a few days ago, concurrent with the movie, with the same thing happening. Challenger Hoax says, what did she say about the Challenger Hoax? She laughed about how those people were all still alive and it was fake and the moon landing was fake. And that's with Conan O'Brien. And so I'm just wondering here, is this to somehow diffuse, distract, or is it just, you know what I mean? Like, they joke about it. Now, anybody else telling the truth about it's going to be drowned out by the people who are joking about it. I mean, they could be using comedy to diffuse quite a bit. I think that might be the case. I think they call it blackwashing. It's like a propaganda technique. All right, let's see. There's more. Leo Pirate says, in case anyone wants to know more about the movie, he's talking about Mickey 17. It's from the same director of Parasite that was about class warfare. Now, I haven't seen Parasite, but when I saw the trailer for Mickey 17, I said, hey, that character with the raincoat on looks just like Luigi. Watch it be class warfare. Turns out that character is the one who shoots at the Trump-esque character, Mark Ruffalo, and grazes him with a bullet. And a couple of other things. That actor, he's the one in Batman, which again, class warfare. So we have to look into that actor and dig a little deeper. But he said, oh, so that scene, now this is also something that's important here. Because not only did the Trump-esque character get grazed by a bullet, but he demanded the cameraman open the camera and let him pose. So it was exactly what happened at Butler. However, as pointed out by Leo Pirate, it was filmed in 2022. How to explain that? I guess one of two things. Either the Trump staged assassination was planned years ago and was always going to happen on that date, and all these movies were released concurrently for the reasons I frequently describe. They are setting the stage, establishing narrative frameworks, putting the stories out. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. It's just propaganda saturation, but it's either that, and it was planned long in advance, and Trump is an actor, or the director of the movie is somehow psychic, prophetic. But you can't really say that because we can point to half a dozen or more other directors who gave identical messaging. So they can't all be psychic. Is it the simulation speaking through filmmakers? Praise the sim. I mean, some people still say, oh, it's the simulation, or it's just a coincidence. No, that all has really fallen apart in the last year. Coincidence theory doesn't hold up. Simulation theory doesn't hold up. What we have are the observed synchronizations between entertainment and the releases of these movies and the real events. It is structural, systemic fakery. I mentioned this the other day, but I want to bring it up one more time. NASA is shutting down the International Space Station sighting website. The last date will be June 11th. So starting June 12th, you will no longer be able to find the ISS from their website. And I was just noticing the timing because in the Space Needle centric movie Final Destination, one of the main characters is in the 100, which is a movie about a post-nuke apocalypse Earth being repopulated by essentially space arcs full of young adults. And one of the characters in that movie is in the Final Destination movie. And the season finale of that movie, the space station explodes. And I was doing some research into it, and it turns out that episode aired on 6/11. So it's just another one of these reoccurring connections between the space station, the Space Needle, and some kind of blackout situation, which is a reoccurring theme in all of these various movies. In fact, I was talking about how Fantastic Four has the blackout situation, like Leave the World Behind. But this 100 series also has that. In the series The 100, it's specifically about how AI takes over our government and realizes that mankind is overpopulating, they're destroying the earth, so it decides to wipe us out with nukes. But it saves a certain number of people in these space arcs and then begins the repopulation. Tomonoid says Parasite won the 2020 Oscars also. So in the headlines right before the lockdowns. Okay. I'll have to look into Parasite. I'm not familiar with it, but Leo Pirate has checked it out. So President Trump announces a year-long celebration to mark the 250th anniversary of American independence. So again, this is an interesting time period we're reaching here, this part of the year. We have the No Kings protest movement organizing for Trump's birthday, and that's after 6/11. And this reoccurring symbolism, it's what is so striking to me, because we're talking about the character in the movie Iris, and she's blindfolded, so I'm thinking something about the eyes. And then they unveil, and she takes the blindfold off, she sees the Space Needle. And she goes up to the roof, and there's this kid throwing a penny off the roof, and she tries to stop him. And then someone shows me Itchy and Scratchy. And in Itchy and Scratchy, the mouse tries to kill the cat by throwing pennies off the Space Needle. It doesn't work, so he chops the Space Needle off right beneath the UFO. And it falls, and the point of it goes into the eye of the cat. And the connection with the needle, the eye, that's kind of what I'm pointing out here, because I was noting how at the beginning of the Elvis movie, there's a montage, which you can find on YouTube, which creates this Space Needle out of the International Hotel's 3 columns on their sign with the Starship Enterprise on top. And then it montages into an eyeball. And then it jumps to a needle. And the needle goes into Elvis to resurrect him because he's unconscious. But as that happens, they're playing the Space Odyssey song. So you got Space Odyssey, needle, kind of intertwined. A lot of overlapping symbols that, I'm just saying that have been reoccurring here, worth looking at closely. And another connection here, too, is the One World Trade Tower has often been compared to a big syringe. And this is not unintentional. If you look at the significance of 2020, the world locking down, the unity behind it all. But the Space Needle seems to be the target for the next 9/11 in this scenario that's been projected. And it wouldn't make sense it would be redundant to go after the One World Trade Tower. It would be redundant. So they clearly have this other intention, but it's an analogous structure. So I had a couple of notes here that connect to Siri and the eye, though. Okay, here we go. So we're talking about 1968, the year the Twin Towers construction begins. Also the year Space Odyssey is released. And so 1968 is a significant year. And in Space Odyssey, one of the main characters is Hell 9000, who is just a single lens, an eye like Siri. Siri is Iris backwards, and Iris is the main character in this movie. So I think all of this might relate to the merging of the individuals with the collective through the monolith, the screen. And the symbol of the monolith in 2001 Space Odyssey has been connected with the movie screen. But also there is a Monolith Hilton Hotel at Ground Zero. So we're not reaching here. There's actually a story being told through the architecture as well as through the movies. But if we look at the role of Space Odyssey 2001, or rather Kubrick, and his various psyops, and then that movie and his other movies, they seem to be telling the story, specifically Space Odyssey, is the story of man merging with the screen. The two worlds colliding, the dream world, the real world. Just like Downward mentioned in King Kill 33, that these big psyops are meant to alchemically process us. And the alchemists describe this process of unifying the mind, subconscious and conscious, the moon and the sun, which is why in 2001 Space Odyssey they have the monolith with the eclipse over it. That symbol, that recurring symbol of the sun and the moon merging, seems to be, in my view, the merging of the movie world, the simulation, with the real thing, as we're dragged into this collective movie with every subsequent major psychological operation, from JFK, the nuke, Apollo 11, 9/11, 2020. So the Space Odyssey is really about the journey into not outer space, but their control of our inner space, the space between our ears. So what I'm suggesting here is that the symbolism of the One World Trade Tower, the Tower of Babel, the space station, the Space Needle, it's about this unity of the monolith, of course. Like, it's like a new monotheism, essentially. The one world view, the one world myopic perspective that we're all made to share. But we wouldn't be all on the same sheet if we weren't all hit with the same psyops. It's the psyops that keep us all on the same sheet. Because what are psyops? Fake news events, history in the making, our collective backdrop, our agreed upon consensus of what happened before. And that this is all manufactured. Our past is manufactured. And that's not even conspiracy conjecture. It's not Tartarian speculation, about ancient civilizations. I'm talking about recent history. Let's just talk about recent 20, 30, 40 years. Since we've been paying attention, what we've looked into closely, we can argue that our history has largely been manufactured. And they're not making it up as they go. The predictive programming that we're constantly referencing shows you that there's long-term planning, specifically that goes into the major, what I consider to be transformative events. Okay, so let's see here, going through comments. Ted Stryker says, Daniel Penny. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Daniel Penny, because Synchromorpheus had noted that in profile, Daniel Penny has an uncanny resemblance to Abraham Lincoln. And Daniel Penny fits right into the class warfare narrative. We're talking vigilante representing the elite, killing somebody in the subway, which represents the underclass. And he's seen as a hero by the elite, but an oppressor and a villain and a murderer by the poor, or by those who represent the poor. So in other words, in this class warfare structure, Daniel Penny is a villain to the poor, but a hero to the rich. Whereas Luigi Mangione is a hero to the poor and a villain to the rich. And he's a vigilante to the left. And as Luigi goes into prison, Daniel Penny comes out. So Daniel Penny has been connected to this class warfare narrative, but specifically the race war stuff, because he did strangle a mentally ill black man on the subway. And he, of course, got away with it. So he was also one of the biggest earners on GoFundMe, which is also an affront to the other side. So you're looking at this manufactured hero / villain for each side, and Daniel Penny fits right into it. So the name obviously ties into this, but it ties into class warfare, civil war, race war, and now we have the penny playing a significant role in the Final Destination movie. It actually causes the destruction of the Space Needle, which is crazy, but you have to see the movie. But also Lincoln being brought right into it because his association is the headshot. And we have, of course, the USDA putting these big murals on the side of Lincoln and Trump side by side. So they're making these connections. And there are numerous connections between the assassinations of JFK and Abraham Lincoln, as we've talked about. And much of the things that connect them aren't just about the assassination. It's when they get elected. It's these various nuances of their lives. But they're spaced 100 years apart. So you have a century encoded into this. The Century Project, the $100 million into the Space Needle. That's why I mentioned the show called The 100. Because there's been this theme of the century, or the cent, of course, the penny. And the use of the $100 bill, the reference to it, in conjunction with the destruction of the Space Needle, occurs in a number of movies. The Sonic the Hedgehog movie, he's paid in $100 bills after trashing Seattle and flooding the Space Needle. in the free guy, they hit the reset button, so we're talking blackout, reset. They hit the reset button on the simulation. The guy who hits it is wearing this $100 bill stylized shirt. And currency has been significant in this broader context of predictive and concurrent programming. Think about the folded bill, the $20 bill that gives you the Twin Towers burning. And we talked about the many connections between 9/11 and the killing of George Floyd. The symbolism, the Twin Towers, the Twin Cities, the $20 bill being the cause of Derek Chauvin and the others showing up to arrest George Floyd. So the money has been used to carry a bit of significance and symbolism, but the $100 bill in particular, and this has been noted for some time, when folded the same way you fold the $20 bill, seems to show a Space Needle-like structure with an explosion above it. I mean, it's somewhat subjective. Yeah, Newsbenders came out in 1968 and also foreshadowed the Twin Towers. So if you haven't seen Newsbenders, it's pretty much required watching. It's 30-minute theater. And it's about this secret organization that infiltrates every news agency at the very top, and they recruit people to work for them. But once you get in, you have an implant, and if you try to spill the secrets, you die. And they are told as they get recruited that we write the news 5 years in advance. And they do so for mankind's own good, and at the end they reveal that the news is written by a supercomputer, which is an interesting detail because of the year 1968, but HAL 9000's year. This is a kind of a must-watch because the concept here is that the elite have decided that they can best exert control and peace if they plan things out in advance 5 years. And I'm looking at that as a conservative estimate. 5 years, maybe in detail 5 years, but I think they plan out much longer. I mean, I think it's astrological. I think they go by precession of the equinox, thousands of years, but the details are much more, I think, down to the 5 year, 2 year, or 1 year increment. As they get closer and closer, they get more details, but it's written in advance. And Newsbenders is pretty much an apt description of how things really work. Now, how long have they been newsbending? Well, it's kind of an interesting question because at this point, and I'm reading Fraser's Golden Bow because I'm thinking about the role of mythology and priesthoods and superstitions and how these relate to even modern society. And there's a point where some of these big psychological operations that we call news and events and historical events that happened, I'm looking at these things as contemporary myths. 9/11 was a contemporary myth. The killing of George Floyd was a myth. And that these are things that are meant to shape our consensus worldview. The moon landing was a miracle for all intents and purposes. And it was a miracle that demonstrated the efficacy of our priesthood, our scientists. And it allowed this new religion, Nasatology, to dominate all the other religions. It performed a miracle in front of the world. And it's not incompatible with them, but they all exist beneath it. And this is one of the other themes here. So the Titanic, the Twin Towers, the One World Trade Tower, the Space Needle Space Station, all these things point to the monolith, the one world, everything being united. And I think that's what the Space Needle ultimately is going to symbolize. It's this present unity that's about to be disrupted. And the disruption has to do with disease X. It has to do with the space junk, the mind junk, and this need for mind virus, I guess some kind of lockdown. But it's definitely tied into the madness and disease X, this upcoming blackout. And my thinking on it is this. They can't really shut everything down because what they're pretty much threatening us with or foreshadowing EMPs and stuff, these things may not actually exist in the way that they are described if nukes are actually fake. So we're talking about mostly simulation. So I don't think that they're going to literally destroy the infrastructure to give us a blackout. but I think they might get the public to acquiesce to it in the same way that we voluntarily locked down. Like, hey, because we allowed free speech, thanks America, look what happened. Bunch of radicals, identitarian, right-wing nationalists merged together, and they played out the Turner Diaries on the world stage, and they blew up a lot of stuff. And now we're in the dark, so we're not going to reopen a commons of cyberspace until everybody has their minds vaxxed. And this is what the WHO projected for the future. They said that the next big one is Disease X, and we have to plan for it. And when I saw Disease X coming out, and then I see monkeypox being talked about, and we talked about this when it was happening, they seem to be foreshadowing and conflating the emergence of a violent mind virus. The Civil War movie, the recent one, directed by the guy who wrote 28 Days Later, was all about this. The media spread mind virus that radicalizes people to do crazy things like nuke other countries or destroy their own infrastructure. Yeah, that would be, I think, a sufficient pretext for people to agree, hey, we have to rebuild a little more carefully. So we're in a post-COVID world now. We're trained on it. We know how it works. We have the necessary skills now to work remotely. So we're basically capable of lockdowns. But the next phase is likely going to be, in my view, doing an analogous thing with the internet. I mean, AI seems to be taking over a lot of the guardrailing roles. And there's all these studies that have been conducted. I mean, the University of Zurich was kind of roasted for what they did, releasing bots on Reddit to prove they could change people's minds, and that the bots are 6 times more persuasive than real people. And that's just what we've been told about. It's like they could fake an alien invasion, and as long as they have more bots than real people, and the bots are non-skeptical, they're going to advance their alien agenda. And we are outnumbered because there's an infinite number of bots, but there's only so many of us real people. All right, let's continue. I'm going through my notes here. 1968 is a significant year. It's a milestone for the Metascript. When I first I took the term Metascript when I recognized something happening in 2020. I started picking up on things. I was like, wait, Trump said something about when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So when the looting starts, the shooting starts was a Trump phrase that was thrown out there, and immediately people in the media said, hey, he's taking the words out of the mouths of 1967, 1968 segregationists. But he claimed he didn't know. And I thought, okay, there's no way that he would have said that if he knew the real context, but he was fed that line. But why are they feeding him lines from that specific year? And the more we looked at it, the more I started mind mapping it, we started recognizing, okay, a lot of things from 1968 just coincidentally reoccurred in 2020. Even the term coronavirus was coined in 68. And I started noting these overlaps to a point where I started to see, okay, it seems that they recycled a lot of the summer of 68 and superimposed these news cycles over 2020, almost like they're recycling psyops. But I thought if there's something to this, if there's a deliberate strategy here, then we're looking at a form of news scripting. And I said this is a script that encompasses many years, many platforms, and it's not confined to one network, but it seems to be the script that everything actually bends towards, that this is the meta script. And as we followed this pattern, it held true. 1969 corresponded to 2021 in many significant ways. There's even an anniversary. So on the anniversary of Apollo 11 walking on the moon, Jeff Bezos launches to space. And he launched at, interestingly enough, so anniversary of Apollo 11, but he launched at 9:11 a.m. And I thought that's an interesting choice. Apollo 11, 9/11, common director. But my point here is that we were just noting there seems to be this repetition, and the chances of it being coincidental, we kind of ruled that out after a period, and the pattern emerged here. And we weren't discerning the simulation. And this is why I had to create this kind of a schism with the simulation people. Because the sim people will say, oh, it's a simulation. Nothing to see here. And their curiosity ends. Oh, it's just a sim. It's a computer game. Well, no, if you really believe that, then I am uncovering evidence of God. I mean, what's the difference between the simulation and its programmer and God? We're talking about the same thing, just modern nomenclature. And if you're telling me that we are discerning a pattern that is evidence of a divine hand in human events, then this is the most profound evidence and conclusive evidence for a higher power that has ever been compiled. That predictive and concurrent programming and eerie coincidence in the media suggests there's some higher power working through Hollywood directors, and it's all prophetic. Like, that's very mystical. And that's why I've had a problem with it, is that the mystical is not an explanation. It's actually an admission that the mind can't grasp it. So you can just say, whoa, mind blown, dude. We live in a video game. You know, Joe Rogan level stuff. And I was never satisfied with those explanations. And the truth of it, and the only people who have a hard time believing this or understanding it are the simulation people. The truth of it is, as you gather up the evidence and you note the patterns, you find a model that's actually predictable here. You realize, no, actually, there's a monolithic control over media. And it's exerted over all of the major big platforms. And it creates this correlation between entertainment and fake news, because fake news is not just partisan bias. No, fake news is how they write your history. It's actually kind of nefarious. It's insidious if you think about it. We're talking about a ham-fisted creative control through a exercise as a worldview monopoly without anybody's knowledge. But we're not saying all news is fake, and this is how they succeed. Good liars don't lie with every breath. Nobody would believe somebody who can't tell the truth. Good liars lie strategically only after they've gained your trust. And then they can lie with impunity whenever they need to for advantage. And media is the best liar in the world. It's not a pathological, it's actually a very strategic liar. And everybody believes it. So it doesn't have to lie with every breath. The news media can tell the truth 95% of the time, but it's the fake news events that are the drivers of the bigger narratives. That's where they steer it. So they're not creating the news like in a movie studio somewhere and simulating reality. No, they're bending it. That's why I say Newsbenders is a must watch, because Newsbenders, the title says it all. They're bending the news, which is a lot more achievable, feasible, believable, and it makes a lot more sense than the idea that it's all fake or it's a simulation. Okay, moving on here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the woke right anymore. I just wanted to point out that we have been looking at the structure of the world stage, the narrative frameworks, and the political horseshoe theory. Well, no, we haven't been discredited. We've been nothing but vindicated from day one. I mean, how many times do I have to go to a movie and in advance describing why I'm watching it and what I'm going to see in it, and then we leave and I'm like, okay, look, the movie contained this, this, and that. I mean, even this Final Destination, it even contained more than I imagined it would have. But even the trailers reinforce the general theme. Is it buffering? Apologize for that. Gremlins are always here. I'll see if I can fix that. Okay, well, we've been covering a lot of ground here. We're going to continue tomorrow. The PSYOP trading cards are en route. We had about 75 people here. The numbers will go up. we've had a lot of bad buffering. I understand. I'm trying to, honestly, it's probably not even my end. I think it's all on the server end, but I apologize for the